The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army. And now, ladies and gentlemen,
you are now about to witness the truth.
It's the Benjamin Dixon Show.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the April 4th episode of the Benjamin Dixon Show. I'm afraid Benjamin Dixon cannot join us tonight, so I'll be your host. My name is Brandon Sutton. This is my first time hosting alone, so be gentle with me, Internet. But I guess I'm not really alone because I am joined, as always, by the Progressive Army's best producer, David Grossman. Say hello, David.
More like only producer, but I'll take best over only. Hey, guys.
Well, I mean, it sounds better if I say best, right? You know, you've come in 1 out of 1, so you still technically, you're best. But it's been a long day, so let's jump straight into the news. Breaking news, the most pressing news I'm sure Ben will cover later is that there was, in fact, a toxic gas attack in Syria in the Idlib province of in the town of Khan Sheikhun. Right now, the attack is being blamed on forces close to the Assad regime, and there are estimates that upwards of 100 people have been killed in this attack, including some children. It's really an unfortunate attack here. The White House has already come out to blame President Obama, as is expected, for not being tough enough on the Assad regime. Specifically, they refer back to 2014 when President Obama drew a red line in the sand for Assad using chemical weapons, and did not actually enforce that red line. Some are criticizing this narrative that Assad is behind it because it's not technically based in any kind of evidence, more of an assertion that Assad must be behind it, considering the type of attack. But a lot of critics are out there saying that Assad had no reason for this attack because the rebellion was, despite the fact that fighting was still going on, essentially over. Right? Some people are already are pushing forth this idea that the attack would not have made sense on Assad's part because the rebellion had actually, for all intents and purposes, it had ended about a week ago or a week and a half ago, and now it was all about cleanup. So I'm sure Benjamin Dixon, when he's back tomorrow, will talk to you more about this attack as there are more developments. But we're going to jump into some other stories right now. I just wanted to cover that real quick. So, David, you know what today is? Today's April 4th. What's April 4th?
Well, it's not April Fool's Day. No, it is the anniversary of Martin Luther King Jr.'s death.
It is absolutely the anniversary of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated on April 4th. I believe it was 1968. Is that correct? I believe it is. And as we are now as we are seeing this new rise in protest culture, as more and more people are becoming politically active, engaging in acts of protest and demonstration, I think it's really important to go back and and engage with the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. In fact, I would argue that it's more important to engage with his legacy on the day of his assassination than it is to engage with it on the day of his birth. But we all celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. in January the 16th, although some people are against even that being a holiday. John McCain. Sorry, I had racist in my throat. That was a really bad joke. Anyway, so in engaging with Martin Luther King Jr.'s actual legacy, we have to also engage with how he's been in some ways whitewashed and defanged. Both him and his message have kind of lost their bite as both liberals and conservatives seek to co-opt his legacy, seek to co-opt his movement and make it sort of suit their needs. Right. So, and one of the big ways we see this is with the removal of MLK's class analysis, the reduction of Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy and his critique on American society as being one entirely based on the discrepancy between white and black people. And in a lot of ways, this is, this erasure of class as one of his key critiques has become a dominant part of the liberal narrative around Martin Luther King Jr. And so we hear quotes every year. We hear his "I Have a Dream" speech every year, but we don't hear some of these quotes from Martin Luther King Jr. Some of them, his ones that were more entrenched in class analysis. So I'm going to read you a few of his, less known quotes. And one day we must ask the question, Why are there 40 million poor people in America? And when you begin to ask that question, you are raising questions about the economic system, about a broader distribution of wealth. When you ask that question, you begin to question the capitalistic economy. And I'm simply saying that more and more, we've got to begin to ask questions about the whole society. Now, he said that on August 16th of 1967. Similar quotes here. In a sense, you could say we're involved in the class struggle. I imagine you already know that I am much more socialistic in my economic theory than capitalistic. Capitalism started out with the noble and high motive, but like most human systems, it fell victim to the very thing it was revolting against. So today, capitalism has outlived its usefulness. This was back in 1952. So Martin Luther King Jr. was, delivering a class analysis of the poverty and structural inequality that the Black people were facing back then. And now in 2017, as we grapple with his legacy, both on the day of his assassination and the anniversary of his birth, an entirely different Martin Luther King Jr., one that was more focused on a very milquetoast critique of race relations, identitarian relationships between Black and white people that are divorced from the way, the broader economy affects that thing. Furthermore, we see this false dichotomy being constructed between MLK and Malcolm X as it relates to violence and protest. So Martin Luther King Jr. is known for saying that, riots are a language of the unheard, that riots are not really to be blamed on the rioters, but in fact on the structural inequality that the rioters are actually rioting against. That it's the reflection of a society that is not hearing these people's demands for change. And am I wrong? Am I wrong, David? Am I wrong in lobbying this critique that liberals and conservatives have reconstructed Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy?
Absolutely not. I mean, what argument really based in fact, if they dig down, could they really come up to say that you are wrong? I mean, it's when you really look at Martin Luther King Jr., it's pretty plain that what we're taught in schools or what's popularized about him is completely made vague on purpose.
I mean, yeah, it's made vague, right? Like, that's the thing. Like, it's made into this kind of, it's the exact same rhetoric we hear from Democratic leaders right now. It's the exact sort of rhetoric that we heard from President Obama for 8 years about the need for Black people to kind of close up out of the shackles of oppression, but not really grappling with what those shackles are made of. Right? Like, it's a pointing out of the fact that there exists structural inequality, but not getting to the foundations of what that lies at. It's not about erasing race. It's about grappling with the foundations of racism and the foundations of inequality. And nowadays we have liberal concern trolling over whether or not the tactics of modern protests are contiguous with what Martin Luther King Jr. wanted. And this is why it's important to actually engage with Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy, because this false Martin Luther King Jr., this imagined civil rights leader who acts quietly and was so pro nonviolence and pacifist that he would be admonishing the Antifa and Black Bloc of today who are engaging in, militant activism, is used as, basically Martin Luther King Jr. is used as a cudgel against those who are now engaging in activism as the sort of standard bearer for what activism should look like. But it's not even really him. It's an imagined Martin Luther King Jr. It's a imagined civil rights movement, really. People who point to the tactics of today are comparing them to tactics that never really existed. It's the functional equivalent of they're basically saying make protests great again, right? It's this idea that protests now are disrespectful of the mentality of the world's best protester, when in reality, Martin Luther King Jr., if he was the way people present him in the in history books right now, if he was actually the way, he probably wouldn't have been assassinated. Right? His socialist message was, his class analysis was what made him incredibly dangerous. His desire to actually, cost money to the people who hold the means of production is what made him a dangerous threat. And today we have this disrespectful tweet from the FBI, right? So I think a lot of people were up in arms about a tweet by the FBI, honoring Martin Luther King Jr. Day of his assassination, as though people have forgotten that 49 years ago, the FBI was trying to blackmail Martin King Jr. into committing suicide. It's just like that. Hoover personally was harassing Martin King Jr. on behest of the state, and it really comes down to this notion of like, what is respectability politics in protesting, and how has Martin King Jr.'s legacy been corrupted and co-opted by those who are trying to maintain the status quo and trying to stop any sort of legitimate change in society. And the answer is respectability politics in protesting, whether we're talking about Martin King Jr., we're talking about whoever is leading protests today, whether it be Linda Sarsour, Angela Davis, DeRay, I guess. Respectability politics is not determined by your tactics. It's determined by the way, determine what you're protesting. Like, that's what determines whether or not your protest or your movement or your activism is in fact respectable. It's the thing in which you're protesting. Otherwise, it's disingenuous. It's just concern trolling. To pretend as though people will listen to your protest, the demands of your organization, if you just ask politely, has never actually been the reality. But it has so become the dominant narrative of the disaffected moderate liberal. And Martin King Jr. speaks on this as well, and he speaks to the fact that the moderate white man, the moderate liberal, because really we can replace white person at this day and age for liberal, because we also have non-black minorities, we have we have women, white women, we even have people of color, black people, going out there and concern trolling around Black Lives Matter, around Antifa protests, around whatever particular, the deplatforming of Charles Murray, the deplatforming of Milo Yiannopoulos, the deplatforming of Gary McInnes. We have liberal guys like that's just freedom of speech. Nah, dude, nah. And what would Martin King Jr. say? It's like, well, Martin King Jr. would probably be in favor of it. At least the Martin King Jr. that actually existed, and not the Martin King Jr. you've constructed as, I guess you've weaponized against the status quo. Rather, you've weaponized in favor of the status quo. Rather. And so, we just have to actually, on the day of his death, if not the day of his birth, understand what actually got him killed. And it was not this sort of kumbaya, like, people are equal message. It was his deep class analysis and his desire to engage in, global socialism. Like, that's what got him killed. Like, it was not this kind of whitewashed message. But we should actually move on. Do we have any callers? We should probably take a caller if we have any.
We don't have a caller at the moment. I think there was someone trying to call in earlier. So if you want to call in, the number is 857-600-0518. It's 857-600-0518. Back to you.
Well, since we're talking about civil rights anyway, let's talk about Jeff Sessions, because Jeff Sessions is a walking civil rights disaster, and he's now in charge of the DOJ, which ironically was established in the 1870s during Reconstruction to fight for civil rights in the South, to protect the rights of the newly won rights of Black people, the newly freed slaves in the South. So on Monday, an internal DOJ memo was released to the public regarding the federal oversight on a handful of police departments. Specifically, the memo detailed Sessions' calls for sweeping reform of the federal agreements reached with law enforcement agencies under President Obama. President Obama's enduring legacy, or what would be his enduring legacy, was a few dozen consent decrees that were the result of long investigations into various troubled police departments. Seattle, Cleveland, Ferguson, Missouri, Baltimore, Chicago, where these investigations by the DOJ uncovered patterns of abuse and unconstitutional uses of force, the killings and subsequent mishandling of cases involving unarmed minorities by police, municipal plunder, as was the case in Ferguson, where police departments were going out and purposely preying on communities of color to fill their coffers, and just basically patterns of harassment and dysfunction. So Sessions has come out, and specifically in Baltimore, is attempting a stay on the consent decrees, citing both a desire to citing a desire to not impede the work of police officers and police departments based on a few bad actors. So basically, Sessions has adopted the language of Blue Lives Matter. He has adopted the language of, the fraternal brotherhood of police as it comes to these civil rights abuses. And he claims that federal oversight and consent decrees are abuses of federal authority. Furthermore, he's blaming the rising crime rates in Chicago on the demonization of the police force, and the undermining the respect for our police forces that became under President Obama. So we have the Blue Lives Matter's greatest hits. Jeff Sessions' memo. The idea that the rising crime rates in Chicago, though crime rates in Chicago I do not believe are actually rising, but let's present they are. The rising crime rates in Chicago are the result of the undermining of respect for law enforcement that occurred when President Obama engaged in the DOJ investigations that unfairly demonized entire departments as opposed to just pretending as though they're bad actors. But it's interesting, right? So the head of the DOJ, whose purview is really investigating civil rights abuses, has come out and said that they will not investigate civil rights abuses by police departments around America because that would impinge upon their ability to do their job when they're not doing their job because they're busy committing civil rights abuses. I'm going a bit cross-eyed. Speak on this, David.
So, I mean, is it really any surprise that he's going to do this? Despite anything he's ever said in his career or his claims, his actions speak louder. And I think that this depending on what comes out of this, it may be less worse than I would expect, but it's only year one. So we have 3 more years of this at a minimum, and the real question is, how far do they take this? Are they? I don't think that this mentioned the militarized police, did it?
No.
So we have that. The Obama administration kind of took a step back, or claimed to have, and tried to weaken that program where the equipment and everything and the weaponization of police were, they were selling or giving out for free, even some of the overstock. And we haven't seen the Trump administration go in that direction yet, but I mean, is it really a question of if or when?
Well, the idea that the police departments in these particular few dozen instances are not engaging in massive civil rights abuses is ridiculous, right? So Chicago, as an example, we know there are unconstitutional black sites in Chicago where police officers are disappearing those who are suspected of crimes and torturing them there before they are ever booked or brought to a police station or given in front of a judge. Like, we know that's happening. There have been multiple reports on this. We know that the DOJ's investigation into Baltimore and the subsequent consent decree that came out of that investigation was the result of the Freddie Gray incident, right? Where it was presented as though Freddie Gray, who died in police custody in the back of a police van, broke his neck. That was ruled a homicide, but there was no charges brought on anyone, really. No police officer involved in the case saw jail time. We know what happened in Ferguson, the case of Mike Brown, and also the subsequent. Oh, okay. Okay, well, we had a call. They don't want to speak to me. It's fine. I know how it is. I'm not Benjamin Dixon. I'm doing my best. That's okay. So the idea that police departments all over America are not rights abuses, unconstitutional uses of force is ridiculous. But we also have to remember that this support our police officers, Blue Lives Matter rhetoric was what Trump ran on.
Hello?
Hello, caller.
Hello? Hi.
You are live on the air. What's your name, comment, and/or question?
Hi, this is Dita from San Leandro. Hi, Brandon. Hi, David. My question is that we continue to not look at both sides of the of both parties and the parts that they play. And even with in Chicago, Manuel was sitting there, and none of the Democrats came out or even attempted, or even some of these organizations we have, liberal organizations. Nobody stood up. They should have been there on the ground pushing back on Emmanuel. He should have never gotten away with that. And the Democrats just keep on going. They come up with another distraction, and the so-called progressives just bite feet into it and continue with the narrative instead of really doing the work. We went through the chairperson with Perez, and the treasurer sit there in front of everybody and told us that our job is going to be for the corporate people, not the poor people. And we just continue, just brush over it and just go on to a new conversation.
Vita, so what are you? I know you mentioned Rahm at one point and then Perez. What I guess event or topic are you referring to?
I'm talking about when the young man got killed and he held the tape back, and everybody knew that. The Democrats knew that. And they stood by, and our liberal organizations, nobody fought back. None of the Democrats came out and got on TV like they did for Hillary, or go to MSNBC, or Rachel Maddow, Chris Hayes, all those who continue to say that they're progressive, they're liberal, and they want equality, but they don't come out when it's needed. They should be calling some of their coworkers out. For some of the stuff they do. And look at the bills. We've had hundreds of years of bills of laws and policy. And I'm sick and tired of hearing about class. It's about class. It's not about race. Race and class is intertwined. You cannot separate the two.
We got you, Vita. We got you. Brandon's going to reply to you, though.
I'm going to reply real quick. Why don't you reply first, David? Sum up what you got from that, and I'll reply afterwards.
So, what Vita was referring to was the lip service that politicians, but in this case, we don't expect it from Republicans, but the lip service that Democrats specifically that claim to be progressive, claim to be for the people, claim to be looking out for the best interests. They'll scream Black Lives Matter if they're smart. If they're too cautious, they won't. But they'll scream Black Lives Matter. They'll give out these fancy statements that they're that they're standing up with them, that they're standing in solidarity, that things have to be investigated and looked into. But there's no real action put behind those words, and
absolutely.
She was using the example of, I believe, Laquan McDonald in Chicago when she was mentioning Rahm and Perez.
So for those of you who don't know, and if she hadn't mentioned it, the case of Laquan McDonald became relatively infamous, I would say, after Rahm Emanuel he prevented the tape of McDonald's death from being released until after his reelection. If I'm not mistaken, right? That was the case of Laquan McDonald. So Laquan McDonald was killed by police officers in Chicago, and Rahm Emanuel, as is the case for Rahm Emanuel, decided to sit on the evidence, to sit on the, not release the videotape to the public until after he was reelected. But what David, what Vito was pointing out, what you're bringing up too, is very true, that there exists a performative progressivism within the Democratic Party at all levels, where they go out and they speak this wonderful language, they speak to the concerns of the left, or rather even to the liberal concerns or economic populist concerns, if they even bother with that, and then their actions simply don't match up with that rhetoric. And we see this, we see it from Rahm Emanuel, but we also saw this recently in Cory Booker, who was this progressive darling, the next President Obama, and then he completely just demonstrated his pharma shill bona fides by voting against lowering drug prices or providing competition for drug companies in America. So, performative progressivism has been the strategy of the day for the Democratic Party for a very long time, and it's not going to be until we start actually voting these people out of office that we get a group of legislators whose actions match their words. So it's easy to focus on people like Joe Manchin, whose rhetoric is also terrible and whose actions are equally terrible, if not worse. But we also have to start focusing on people whose simple action does not match. Claire McCaskill, again, Cory Booker, anyone really who is not jumping on this Neil Gorsuch filibuster campaign. It's like like the entire, over the past few weeks, we've had this entire dog and pony show as it relates to the confirmation hearing surrounding Trump's cabinet, of people coming out asking difficult questions and then retreating and voting anyway, whether that be on the right and on the left. And so we have to start demanding more than simple performative opposition to Trump, and even performative progressivism from our legislators to be part of the quote unquote resistance.
Yeah. No, I mean, really, we know what the problems are. The question is,
Are the phone lines clear?
Yeah, the lines are clear at this moment. Yes.
And the number is 857-600-0519.
0518.
Oh, 0518.
And
okay.
I believe you're having a caller call in, so we don't need. So we're trying to keep the lines open.
Yeah, we're gonna keep lines open. So we should have a caller. We're gonna have a special guest joining me for the second half of the show. You may have heard of him. I'm a big fan of his work. His name is Michael Brooks. So, yeah, let him in. Let's see. Answer it. We'll find out. Yes, it's it.
Hi, caller. What's your name, comment, and/or question?
Hello?
Hello?
Hello, this is Michael Brooks.
It's Michael Brooks. I don't think you can hear him, Brandon. Can you hear him?
I can hear him.
Okay.
Here.
There you go.
Can you hear me?
Michael, thanks for joining us.
How's the phone connection? Is it all right? Okay. Just let me know. Am I on now? Okay.
Right now, we're live right now in front of a live studio audience.
Now I can hear myself.
We're having feedback problems? Okay.
Yeah, Brandon.
So can you hear me, Michael?
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. How you doing?
I'm doing fine, Michael. I have a personal question for you.
A personal question. Okay, man, you're going deep out of the gate. All right, sure.
Yeah, I'm going real deep. Personal question, right out the gate. Are you fake news, Michael?
I am not only fake news, I'm a pioneer in fake news. I have been actually collecting intelligence from the Russians for years. And I'm actually really resenting the fact that so many people are getting in on my business. No, that's a cool question because in some ways, because I guess we're at a point where everybody could be accused of being fake news. And I'm not drawing a false equivalency because there really is fake news. There really is lies. There really are, endless varieties of bullshit and dishonesty. But, we don't have agreed upon frameworks. So I'm sure there are plenty of people who tell you that what I do is fake news. Absolutely.
Oh, I'm sorry. There's a little bit of lag between the Skype and the Hangout, so I have a little bit of trouble hearing you. So.
Okay.
It's no problem though. The audience hears you fine. So can you repeat what he said for me, David, real quick?
Is it that?
So that Brandon's not awkwardly staring into the camera, I'll let everyone hear me rehash what Michael said. But basically, he may very well, he would likely be fake news in the eyes of some people, because there's no actual specific formula. I think is what his point was. And so, depending on how you spin it, that might be some people's framing.
Well, I mean, there seems to be a formula, right? There seems to be a formula for fake news in the same way there seems to be a formula for whether or not you're part of the resistance. Like, there seems to be a new litmus test coming in the form of, well, are you or are you not critical Democratic Party's strategy during the 2016 primary and general election. And if you are, you might in fact be fake news. And if you're not, well,
then you're good. Then you're Gucci. Oh. Yeah, I mean, you know, that's a really interesting point. I think, you know what the problem is that I think that some people who critique the Democratic Party and the strategy in 2016, which would include obviously me. I spent a lot of time explaining just how horribly the Democratic Party messed up, and not only that, also hopefully some of the history and the context behind why it did. But I also do think that there's some people that critique the Democratic Party and why they messed up who, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's fake news, but I would say that there are a lot of people who, regardless of what their politics are looking for quick fixes. They're looking for those pop-up ads that show up on on websites like, hey, like, this is what they don't want you to know about refinancing your home, or whatever. I think that kind of shortcuts attitude is seeped into everything. So there's some people that I probably agree with, but they are looking for too simple answers as well. But that's kind of different than fake news. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons I was a little flippant in the beginning when you asked me that. It's just because I think we could say very specifically, like, okay, someone like Alex Jones with like a whole universe built on conspiracy theories. Maybe that, we could be really specific and say that's fake news. Or we could say, Fox News is a propaganda network, or, some of those silly pro-Hillary Clinton websites or something like that. But I think that it's seeped so much into common usage that unless we're describing something really specific, like, hey, that story you're sharing is not a real story, and you should know that. I think it's just kind of a descriptor for what we don't like and what we don't respect and what's a problem. I think it's kind of losing some of its bite. It's probably because Trump uses it all the time too, and hacks and partisans of every persuasion are constantly throwing it out. So if somebody tells me something is fake news, that either means that it's complete garbage, which I should ignore, or it might mean that it's a really, really smart underground website that I'm embarrassed I'm not reading yet. Catching up? Oh
no, I agree. I definitely agree with your interpretation of what fake news is and is not, right? So there's a dichotomy that exists. There is, in fact, a branch of news out there, but it's not new, right? This is not a new phenomenon, right. The kind of fake news that you described in the former half. Your Alex Joneses, your Daily Mails, your Standards, your magazines that appeal to the most base instincts of any political partisan hack that is simply meant to massage their egos, make the other party seem as though it's the worst thing that ever existed in the history of the universe. And then there's this new trend in fake news, right? The fake news that exists in modern political discourse that began with the Washington Post hiring, Proper Not, to expose 200 quote unquote media outlets peddling Russian propaganda, when, as you said, they were just basically alternative media sources. So right. We have to be able to parse that out, right? So, like in the latter case, the case I just described, in the second half, it's a moral panic. It's a moral panic founded upon, I would say, an inability from mainstream sources to contend with the proliferation of counter narratives to whatever they're pushing. I think that 2016 is really the first year we've seen such a conflagration of Twitter, alternative YouTube channels, sites besides Daily Codes, because there is that sort of old guard left media. Your Daily Codes, your Daily Beast, your Huffington Post, your Vox, that used to be new media, but now even they're going the way of the establishment, and now you have a new guard coming in that's not afraid to critique the Democratic Party, that's not afraid to critique the establishment, that's not even afraid to critique, the capitalist structure that those things are built upon. And where it becomes problematic is that now the criteria for new fake news seems to be built upon the Russian narrative, right? This RussiaGate, I'm quote saying RussiaGate is the kind of narrative that very loudly and busily goes nowhere. It's going nowhere. But with with situations like Michael Flynn asking for immunity, and Eric Prince coming out that he was having secret meetings with Russian spies, like we see this cycle repeating itself in social media of we're gonna finally get, as Matt Taibbi put in his article in Rolling Stone, we're gonna finally get the big reveal. We're gonna finally get the big smoking gun, and we're finally gonna be able to impeach Trump. And that to me is the most dangerous part of this. That the resistance, quote unquote, the hashtag resistance, has made their primary goal impeaching Trump, by any means necessary.
Right. Well, just the idea of thinking of like some resistance surrogate on MSNBC saying by any means necessary is pretty funny. That's my first thought. I'll work it backwards from there. I think that, I think you're on target. I just think that there's a lot of different things that we need to kind of distinguish and parse out so we don't fall into our own traps. So like the Eric Prince story and the Michael Flynn story are actually important stories in and of themselves, even if they don't fit. I mean, I think the immunity thing with Michael Flynn, I'm not convinced that really means anything. And I don't know what story he has to tell. But I do think that his dishonesty about his contacts with, Russian ambassador is a completely legitimate thing to talk about. The irony with Michael Flynn is that Michael Flynn literally was actually a paid agent of a foreign government, not Russia, but Turkey. And that's actually a big story. That has pretty big implications for U.S. foreign policy towards the Kurds, and how we handle that part of the world. And also Michael Flynn was, hell-bent on war with Iran. So these are important things. The Eric Prince story, that's another great example too. That's a very real story. People jumped on it again as like another sort of, the smoking gun secret reveal. But really what those meetings were about, as far as they've been reported, was they were meetings facilitated by the United Arab Emirates to connect a confidant of Vladimir Putin with people involved with Donald Trump. And the goal was to persuade Russia to pivot away from Iran. That's actually a really dangerous thing. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think Russia is going to pivot away from Iran. And I actually think, because of the situation we're in now, I don't think the Trump administration would be in a position to give Russia the type of stuff they'd have to give Russia in order for Russia to give up Iran. But, my point is that is actually a serious foreign policy question. Like, there are people in this administration that want to attack Iran, and that's what's going on. And I also wouldn't be surprised, to be honest with you, like, I don't believe in this whole, some grand Russia conspiracy, but I do think that, this is a group of people that are very prone to influence peddling. And I think, like, Donald Trump, I'm just going to say this hypothetically, who has any idea? And, I'm sure he would never do anything like this. But, you get some Russian mafia money coming into your condos, and, you don't ask questions, and maybe you don't even realize who you're dealing with. You know what I mean? Like, you might think you're dealing with one group of people and you're really dealing with another. I think, and then the basic idea that Russia had some interest in our campaign, of course they did. Every power has interest in every other power's campaign. We do stuff like this all the time abroad. And it's not going to save us. It's, I think we need to not fall into the other trap of pretending that, like, there's nothing to talk about there. But yes, the kind of hashtag resistance is, hysterical about it, and they're trying to use it as a silver bullet, and that's true. And that's a problem. And then, I think the other point, I probably missed some of what you said because you outlined a lot, but I don't even, like, to me, I don't think impeaching Trump is the goal. I think the most effective part, I think, I don't want to condemn or judge people who are out with resistance. And I think that if Trump is what got you onto politics in a certain way, that's great. But if Trump is not something that we take to be a representation of the whole corruption and poison of our system, which he is, and an exaggeration of it, and a next step, and a unique danger, all of that, but part and parcel of a whole, corporate co-option of this country, then, I'm not interested in going back to Obama-Hillary times. We need to evolve into something much, much better, or we're not going to survive as a species, in fact. So, yeah, that's what I would say on that.
There's a delay, folks, so that's why Brandon's got a slight awkward silence as he
Oh no,
talks.
so
I'm dropping those.
So no,
jewels.
I definitely agree with what you're saying, right?
So
there are actual implications for. Sorry to cut you off, but we can't fall into that trap, right? There seems to be two, disparate opposing forces on the left right now. There is your bitter left who just wants to rehash the Obama administration and rehash everything that Obama did wrong and find these connections between everything that Trump is doing right now and everything that Obama, did or laid the groundwork for, no matter how specious, no matter how, esoteric, no matter, they just want to make everything about the 8 years everyone was kind of asleep. And so do I think there should be an independent investigation of Trump's connections to Russia? Absolutely. And even to be more reckless, do I think there's something sketchy as, along the lines that you've outlined there between Trump and Russia, as so far as global plutocrats are involved with one another? Absolutely. I think that any investigation into the, into connections between Trump and Russia is going to find probably something, untoward. I guess my only real critique of this is how this story has devolved out of control, right? And how this, how this how this collusion, which is a relatively vague term, like whatever that collusion was, has devolved into this global, multi-decade conspiracy that rivals something you would see in the Manchurian Candidate. And and how it's now being mobilized, by conspiracy grifters. So my producer is a big fan of Louise Mensch now. Before he has taken to reading all of her work, and
really?
He is surprised by the insights that she has into the inner workings of the Kremlin. And so like there is in this story about global corruption in the 2017 as represented by Trump, there is the potential to have a larger conversation about the state of geopolitics, the state of the state of the American economy, all of that. But it seems like that narrative is being lost in this kind of more shallow one about, well, how did Putin install Trump as the president of the United States to bring about the apocalypse, or I don't know, turn us into one big Mad Max type wasteland. And it leaves the Democratic Party vulnerable, and it leaves them incredibly vulnerable to in 2018 and 2020.
Yeah, let me. First of all, I agree with you 99%, and I'll give you 1 or 2% where I disagree slightly, just in terms of the politics of it in 2018 and 2020. But I agree with you completely. I mean, I think that's what I was trying to say earlier, is that what this whole thing has shown, and again, it's really annoying because it's like, yeah, I mean, we agree. There is something probably there, and it probably has much more to do with just money, corruption, and sleaziness and influence peddling, which is, very common. This might be at another degree, but whatever. It's not some Manchurian Candidate grand conspiracy. And the fact that people like Louise Mensch are blowing up, a lot of people have made this point that it's like it shows that you can go far in mainstream media if your conspiracy theories and irrationality are the right kind of conspiracy theories and irrationality. And there's no doubt that there's a ton of people who want to obsess over Russia. Some of them, frankly, for like really direct reasons. They completely fucked up a campaign. And it's much more, career preserving to talk about Russia than the fact that you discourage people from knocking on doors in Wisconsin. I think can understand some self-preservation there. But I do think that everybody's always looking for a silver bullet. The only thing I would say in 2018, 2020 is I think that, and this in some ways it's not a defense of the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party is an absolute, mess and really incoherent, although they've come together, they're not great, but overall, like, better than I expected them to be on Gorsuch. The way the questioning on him focused not just on, really important issues like women's health and, and social equality, but they also went to the structure. Like Sheldon Whitehouse really was like, look, you're there on the court to do the bidding of corporations, and that's what this 5-4 thing is about. And so you have that structural questioning, and then the fact that they are going to force the nuclear option, which they have to do. They have to filibuster him. They have to force that option. That's, I want to give them a pat on the back when they at least start to slightly step in the right direction. I think the Russia thing, it can help in certain cases with Democrats that, okay, I don't want them there. They suck, whatever. If we could primary them, that's great. Maybe we win an election in the general, maybe we don't. But for people like Joe Manchin and Heidi Heitkamp and those kind of people, when you have a situation where you can start saying, the FBI is investigating this, and I just don't feel comfortable because, my president might be, jeopardized by this foreign power or whatever. That's not nothing in politics. And the fact that Trump is historically unpopular, even as the Democrats continue to decide, pretty much Bernie, pretty much offer no alternatives, have very weak leaders in general. I mean, part of the many reasons that Trump is so unpopular definitely has to do with the fact that there's a sketchy, weird Russia story every day. And for most people that are normal people that don't follow this stuff obsessively, it just kind of fits into the general impression that, like, this is a corrupt, out of control, extreme, and insane White House. And, that's obviously all true. So I think, if they keep drumming it forever and that's all they got, I don't know. I mean, it's not going to succeed on its own. They might just do their usual Democratic strategy, which is that Republicans make things so horrific they win by default. But I think if you put it in the right place and it's part of the mix, it could, you could score some points with it. And I don't really have a problem with that.
And as Brandon catches up again, I'm sure he's going to cut me off.
So
Brendan is catching up.
No, because we did a bit of a lag. But so, yeah, I do agree with you, right? I was happy when Chuck Schumer came out, and not only happy, but surprised. And that's sad, right? It was actually a surprise that Chuck Schumer came out and said, hey, you know what? That thing you did with Merrick Garland, that was pretty effed up. We're not going to let you get away with it, without some kind of repercussions. That was surprising because, as you pointed out, the Democratic Party has, it's equal parts corrupt, equal parts weak, equal parts learned helplessness as it comes to, like, actually standing up Republican. They're, in some ways, they're the political party equivalent of Jeb Bush in the 2016 primary debates, just constantly getting smacked around and unable to stand up. And so I was like, yes, you finally did it correctly. And I do agree. I think that the Russia thing is, in some ways, has become Trump's Benghazi, right? For lack of a better analogy. And really, it really is that in some ways. It's the it's the Benghazi for liberals. There is
Benghazi hurt Hillary. Just to cut in, like, as crazy. I mean, I think honestly, there was less to Benghazi than there is with Russia, and way less with Russia than what liberals want. But the thing with Benghazi is just setting aside the rightness of it, it actually was effective. I mean, they were crazy, and we made fun of them. Like, how many hearings are you going to have? This is nonsense. Well, they kept fishing, they kept digging. That led to the email server, and that was part of what made her campaign not work. So even that crazy nonsense that they went after, and they did all these committees, and they always ended up clearing her substantively, that still actually was pretty effective politically. And, I guess this is the part of me that's kind of low. On one hand, I'm like, we need to have universal health care, and we need to have a serious left robust agenda that's for real. But then on the other hand, I'm like, yeah, I don't really have a problem if Democrats want to start, brass knuckling it and get it a little bit cheaper. I'm fine with that. But, maybe that's just me.
From a point of, I'm sorry, I agree with you. From the point of political expediency, Benghazi absolutely hurt Hillary Clinton. It put this, it put this narrative in the media that she was unfit for the job, and Trump, and this Russia thing is doing a similar thing to Trump. So I think it's absolutely true that it is hurting his support within his own party. It's shaving off some of those Republican voters, along with some of his other dalliances. And it is actually hurting him. But I guess I fall more into the camp that that where I'm like, I would also like to see them focus on proactive policy agenda. Because from my perspective, what this Russia thing is, as you pointed out so cogently, it's that kind of reactive mentality that, well, we're just going to make the other person seem so bad that they have no choice but to vote for us. And furthermore, like some of the rhetoric that's coming out of the Russia stuff. So again, I feel it's constantly necessary because of the climate that other leftist commentators create to constantly harp on the fact that I don't want to dismiss this collusion between Russia and Trump offhand, because there does seem to be a lot of sketchy things going on. And if there needs to be there does need to be an investigation, needs to be an independent one. Nunes is not, he should not be heading anything. But from my perspective, but from my lens, I think that it's demonstrative of the Democratic Party establishment, as you said, trying to escape blame, trying to assuage their own kind of, cognitive dissonance over, hey, Hillary Clinton losing to this clown is an indictment of everything we are and everything we believe in. And so we just can't handle that, right? We can't admit that to be true and also stay in power. But it also acts as a safeguard against having to deal with the sort of progressive insurrection that's going on in the Democratic Party, right? Because if you can position everyone who voted for Bernie Sanders or everyone who didn't support Clinton as somehow being influenced by, the equivalent of Russian cyborgs, or Russian bots, as it was, like it, Bernie Bro. What was that article? And I believe it was Salon. Bernie Bros were influenced by Russian propaganda was the headline. Like, you can effectively silence any kind of legitimate opposition. Where it becomes difficult, in our position, is trying to create this space on the left and leftist media where you can be critical of Russia and Trump.
I just had a thought I had never thought of before. Maybe what happened was, and this is just, I might be blowing everybody's mind here, but I just got to say this. Maybe what happened was there was a Russian agent inside the first Clinton administration who told Bill Clinton to deregulate Wall Street, sign welfare reform, increase inequality, and then somehow took over the Democrats in Congress to have many of them go along with the invasion of Iraq and the Bush tax cuts and do even more deregulation. And then they all set it up knowing that would lead to, after Barack Obama didn't do enough on the housing crisis, inequality still spiked, massive student loan crisis. They knew that in 2016 they were sitting pretty to have Trump be president, which they've been planning along for the whole time. So it actually would be the Russians' fault, and we were deceived. The Bernie Bros, we were as Bernie Bros. The Russians got us, man.
You heard it here, folks. First, you heard it on the Benjamin Dixon Show. We got it. We nailed it.
Well, honestly, with theories like that, Michael, I'm surprised you're not on MSNBC. Like, Rachel Maddow better watch out, because that's the kind of connecting the dots that gets you your own whiteboard in an infinite number of push pins. That's that kind of thinking. You can write your own Office Max gift certificate for office supplies to facilitate all your conspiracy theory needs. But no, so I agree with you. I think there's damage to be done, but I think that the damage that is being done is this. It's the strategy still emphasizes the exact same group the Democratic Party was emphasizing during the primary election, and that was this is red meat for liberals, and it's attacking the Republican support for their own candidate as opposed to reaching to the left, which is what I would like to see from them. Whether or not it's effective is, I guess, immaterial in certain ways to me, because I actually want to see some kind of, I don't know. I'm 26 and I don't have health care, so like it's hard for me to get work
Yeah.
So I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that this strategy might work. It might work. It might work in the way you said. It might lead to a fishing expedition that finds out something incredibly scandalous, golden showers or not. But it's not going to appeal to those who didn't come out and vote. It's not going to appeal to those. And also, just functionally, if I'm to believe that the Russians' multi-decade plan caused Hillary Clinton to only lose by 35,000 votes across like 4 states, so that's the thing, right? So let's talk about just sheer numbers. If we're to believe that this plan was, it's just complex multi-decade plan. Some of the timelines I've read go back to the 1984 Miss Universe pageant in Moscow. And Clinton only actually lost by 35,000 points. 35,000 votes in a few counties across the Midwest in the Rust Belt. So really, what you're saying is that that the whole plan of the Kremlin could have been defeated by a few trips to Kinko's, and to get them flyers printed.
But what they did was that what Russia must have had an agent that told Hillary Clinton that showing up in the Midwest with Pharrell was way more important than talking about a jobs plan. And I mean, I think that, look, you're saying talking about appeal, appeal to people like you as a 26-year-old who doesn't have health insurance, or, any number, or, me speaking personally as, like many others still dealing with student loan debt, or even just somebody that frankly grew up, like it wasn't easy for me in the same way with like other, pundits in this business, because my family, I'm, whatever, privileged in terms of race and gender, blah, blah, blah. But, I grew up in a very poor family. So I knew like when the Clintons did welfare reform, that was an attack on people that didn't have money. That there was no, they could put as much glossy language on them as you want, but that's a vicious attack on people that are suffering and need, in fact, obviously significant help and investment, not, further abuse. And I think, I just wanted to add to what you're saying. It's like, yeah, it's not going to appeal to people. And even more importantly, it's not going to help people. And I think that, especially post-Obama, Obama's the really good example of this because, under President Obama, he's a successful centrist president, right? Like slightly center left. I did that awkward alliteration there because I could barely call him left. But, he implemented a program, which, the ACA, we saw it repeal. I definitely would prefer Obamacare to nothing. He did some, modest reforms in the financial sector. He did some good things here and there, which, we're seeing Republicans in, like, yes, it does make a real difference. But, on the other hand, it's also like, what version of the apocalypse do you want? The fast, accelerated one we're in now? Or do you want this kind of slow motion, grinding misery of late stage capitalism and deprivation with some modest cushioning? And, my politics, my values, my experience, my commitment is something radically different and something radically new that would fulfill people's needs, help people live up to their potential, have actual joy and meaning in their lives. It wouldn't clog up resources in this incredibly wasteful, inefficient, unequal, and disgusting way. And it would also do something about, the world system and the environment so that we can actually continue to survive as a species. And, that old option set, that kind of softer version of the, neoliberal late stage capitalist space, that's, I'm practical enough to recognize the difference between something being better and worse, but I'm also large enough in my view to know that both options really ultimately don't work for what we need to achieve. So I think you're totally right.
So I'm in favor of the apocalypse. So I have a hard time, hard time negotiating that with you because I was raised on Mad Max and Resident Evil and all of these movies that so I've been preparing for the apocalypse for the past, I would say, 10 years. And I haven't been hoarding water and canned food and buying gold like as Ron Paul would have me do. I've mostly been training and working with my machete for the inevitable day that
well, you're gonna have to
it is what it is.
You,
I know.
I'm like yoga and running bit. I'm not. I need to get on that machete shit if that's what we're doing.
I plan on ruling the wasteland with an iron fist. Right? So when I'm king of the wasteland, the only decision oligarchs will have to make is where they would like their skull to be positioned in my throne made of skulls.
Insane
so
politics.
that's really
some people that know how to handle themselves. That have left politics. That was what the African National Congress was, and those guys, they weren't sitting around reading like the Johannesburg Gazette bitching.
But no, I take your position very seriously though, despite my joke about making a skull throne. And so far that I think that we do have to have this conversation regarding the lesser of two evils. But also how do we extricate ourselves from this cycle? Or how do we extricate ourselves from this cycle of neoliberal, neo-fascist? Because that does seem to be the way we're. That does seem to be the way people think people are going, and this sort of nostalgia for not only Obama, but the rehabilitation of George W. Bush, which is not a rap album, but in fact an episode of the Ellen Show, is incredibly problematic because we're entering this stage where, and again this speaks to the Russia and how Russia has replaced any sort of ideological purity test with just a very specific tribalist purity test. Are you or are you not in favor of impeaching Trump through the mechanism of least resistance, which is Russia? It has become a very lucrative grift for disgraced Tory MPs. It has also become a very good way to rehabilitate your image in the mainstream, whether you're Dick Cheney or Donna Brazile or George W. Bush. It's also become a very good way to gain relevancy, to regain relevancy, and we've seen that with I think Clinton Watts just recently spoke, ex-FBI agent, and he recently spoke in front of the Intelligence Committee and recently published a piece in the Daily Beast basically calling for a ministry of truth, a private ministry of truth at that, to be constructed by social media to come up with an algorithm to basically provide grades or nutrition, factual nutrition labels for each website to, in order to gauge their truthiness. So like next to your website, you would have a letter grade for how much factual information is based. And this metric is not only based on like literal, facts, but also orientation. And that's where we start sliding down this dangerous slope of how much of this fake news narrative is simply a way for the establishment, both right wing and left wing, and media to not have to grapple with the realities of a diverse political conversation, when that includes brocialists and Bernie bros, and also just your Democratic Socialists of America. Like how much of this is just, like you said, late stage capitalism and its death throes in the domination of the media, having to contend with the proliferation of social media or just alternative media.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, look, that's true. I think that a program like that would, what's ironic is we're in a space now is that if there was actually an attempt by a government agency to implement a program like that, first of all, that wouldn't happen. That would probably be you might see more proposals like this inside Silicon Valley, and that might be like the technocratic response by companies like Google and Facebook that really are media companies but have never really treated themselves that way. I mean, they want to basically be everything. Public utilities, media companies, content creators, conglomerates. And then as soon as the regulatory and public accountability comes in, they want to kind of just scurry off and say like, oh, we're just, nice guys that make apps, even though they're sort of like the robber barons of this new economy. But no, my only thing that I want to caution is I do think that there is a tremendous amount of dishonesty and bullshit in the media. And some of it also is, by the way, like not new. I mean, we've always had Fox News. We've always had Rush Limbaugh. We've always had, and now it's like there's a proliferation. You got everything from the sort of like, pick your poison. You've got the alt center. You've got, like the crazy deranged Russia Hillary people. You've obviously got the alt right. I have some people that I know I get pissed. They get pissed, but I'm sorry. I call them the dumb left. Like there's some of those people that, I would hug them. I probably mostly agree with them, but like, like Jill Stein's not going to be president. And I don't like Hillary Clinton, but she's not the second coming of Hitler. Like, I'm sorry. You know what I mean? And sometimes you just, that's not right. It's not an accurate read of what's going on. And yet, the other big story here though, is that it's amazing to watch these people, particularly people associated with the Clinton world, as they complain about this, because so much of like, part of it, like you talk about the positive part of like social media pushing up new voices and, people being able to have platforms and be like, yeah, I'm a socialist, or yeah, like, this is what I believe, and I'm not sort of wedded to these mainstream narratives. That's the positive part. The negative part is that, the corporate sector has been draining the ability of media to function, journalists to get paid, people to do long-form investigative pieces. The actual economics of it has followed every other trend in our modern economics, which is, shrinkages, massive inequality, starved investment, and everything else. So, part of what you see playing out here in this environment, and the reason that there's an opening for all of the great stuff and all of the terrible stuff, is because, there's been this massive, corporate conglomerations. We've had the mergers, going back to like Telecommunications Act that the Republicans pushed through Congress in the 90s and Bill Clinton signed into law. We're running on monopolies that are really much more focused on ad dollars and ad revenue. And that means that, there's, all the usual stuff, right? Like less foreign bureaus, less investigative reporters. And, that's supposed to be the prestige, good mainstream stuff, let alone the broader range of opinion. So you have, mainstream media subsidizing a bunch of, some good people, but a lot of just mediocre hacks, repeating establishment talking points. And then you got like the Wild West, which we're in, which has stuff that is better than anything else out there. And it's also got a lot of garbage. And none of it is going to be controlled through some type of Orwellian scheme like Watt's talking about. But some of it actually could be reined in by finding different funding models, by introducing some re-regulation, and, actually investing in public and independent and alternative media, like for real.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying, right? So this stuff is not new, and it, in a lot of ways, it's rooted in the removal of the fairness doctrine and also the removal of FCC regulations barring communications monopolies. So we have seen that. I'm gonna let you have that. We're gonna end on Michael's wonderful breakdown of what's causing this, and I appreciate him not lumping me in with the dumb left. I'm only one dumb. Well, I'm only one dumb here. but I'm rapidly
Dude,
becoming smarter.
Stop all that shit. You're smart. Stop all that.
Well, I know. I try my best. Like I said, we're all just killing time until the apocalypse. Right. But before we go, and speaking of funding models, especially considering YouTube's crackdown on alternative left media, this is a perfect segue into a shameless plug and chill. I do want to remind you, first, I want to thank all of the Benjamin Dixon Show's patrons who, without you, this would not be possible. We don't get that lovely, lovely PBS funding that's going to be cut very soon, but we also don't have giant bird puppets. So, hey, you know what? It is what it is. So if you enjoyed the Benjamin Dixon Show, if you enjoyed my attempt at replacing Benjamin Dixon tonight, please feel free to subscribe, feel free to like, feel free to share. And if you feel extra generous, feel free to become a patron for the Benjamin Dixon Show. We have some big moves coming up. Ben has some big moves coming up in the next few weeks that you will become privy to soon. And so it's now is as good a time as any to become a supporting member of the Benjamin Dixon Show. And to incentivize you, as soon as I get off the air tonight, as soon as I stop both assaulting and insulting your eardrums with my inane rambling, Ben is going to drop a 40-minute long bonus show. So you can cleanse your oral palates, that's AURAL, with the dulcet timbre of Benjamin Dixon. So that will be it for us tonight. Thank you for joining us, Michael Brooks.
That show has already been published. So as soon as we go off the air, it's waiting for everybody.
That show has already been published. So as soon as we get off the air, it will be waiting for everybody. So thank you all for joining me on my first attempt to go solo for half an hour and then me being rescued by Michael Brooks. Thank you, Michael Brooks, for rescuing me. You are my hero, Obi-Wan Kenobi. I think he might be gone, which is fine. So shut it down, David, and say good night.
Good night, folks. See you tomorrow.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog, join the Progressive Army, and support The Benjamin Dixon Show. It's Ben Dixon! If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.
Consider becoming a Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.